Today I'm going to continue on with the Secret Teachings of All Ages. This is Chapter 12, The Human Body and Symbolism. And this is it's a quintessential topic, essentially, because the human body is the reference point that we all have in interacting with the world. So almost all of our psychological projections are going to be related to the human shape in some sense. Bear with me just one moment, and I am just going and sharing the link on our Discord. Come and join us on our Discord. The link is in the description. We have a good community, and we discuss many many esoteric topics. This is definitely a good way to go. I don't know why. I'm just. I wish that YouTube would give you the link before you start streaming, so that you could give it out to people. Maybe I'm just an idiot, because maybe there must be something that all right, well, anyhow, I'm going to begin with just, I like to always have some kind of prayer. Sometimes I do it before I start recording, but okay, now we're in the proper state of mind to begin. The human body and symbolism. The oldest, the most profound, the most universal of all symbols is the human body. The Greeks, Persians, Egyptians, and Hindus considered a philosophical analysis of man's triune nature to be an indispensable part of ethical and religious training. The mysteries of every nation taught that the laws, elements, and the powers of the universe were epitomized in the human constitution, that everything which existed outside of man had its analog within man, as the Hermetic axiom, as above, so below. The universe, being immeasurable in its immensity and inconceivable in its profundity, was beyond mortal estimation. Even the gods themselves could comprehend but a part of the inaccessible glory which was their source. When temporarily permeated with divine enthusiasm, man may transcend for a brief moment the limitations of his own personality and behold in part that celestial effulgence in which all creation is bathed. But even in his periods of greatest illumination, man is incapable of imprinting upon the substance of his rational soul a perfect image of the multiform expression of celestial activity. I would say, well, certainly the human being is the reflection of the cosmos, and the microcosm, the microprosopis, the small face of man, is a reflection of the macroprosopis, the large face, or the large face of God. The patterns remain the same at every level. There's a sort of fractal nature to the structure of reality, so that no matter whether you go up or down, you'll always end up somewhere similar. The reason why it's similar to here, and not a completely alien place, with no sensible nature whatsoever, is that there are certain laws of physics that are basically the equation that allows for the fractal patterning. It's like when you have your Mandelbrot set and you're zooming in or zooming out, there's many self-similar images, but it continues into infinity. Recognizing the futility of attempting to cope intellectually with that which transcends the comprehension of the rational faculties, the early philosophers turned their attention from the inconceivable divinity to man himself, within the narrow confines of whose nature they found manifested all the mysteries of the external spheres. As the natural outgrowth of this practice, there was fabricated a secret theological system in which God was considered as the grand man, and conversely, man as the little God. Continuing this analogy, the universe was regarded as a man, and conversely, man as a miniature universe. The greater universe was termed the macrocosm, the great world or body, and the divine life or spiritual entity controlling its functions was called the macroprosopis. Man's body, or the individual human universe, was termed the microcosm, and the divine life or spiritual entity controlling its functions was called the microprosopis. The pagan mysteries were primarily concerned with instructing neophytes in the true relationship existing between the macrocosm and the microcosm. In other words, between God and man. Accordingly, the key to these analogies between organs and functions of the microcosmic man and those of the macrocosmic man constituted the most prized possession of the early initiates. In Isis Unveiled, Helena P. Blavatsky summarizes the pagan concept of man as follows. Man is a little world, a microcosm inside the great universe. Like a fetus, he is suspended by all his three spirits in the matrix of the macrocosmos. And while his terrestrial body is in constant sympathy with its parent Earth, his astral soul lives in unison with the sidereal anima mundi. He is in it as it is in him, for the world-pervading element fills all space and is space itself, only shoreless and infinite. And as to the third spirit, the divine, what is it but an infinitesimal ray, one of the countless radiations proceeding directly from the highest cause, the spiritual light of the world? This is the trinity of organic and inorganic nature, the spiritual and the physical, which are three in one, and of which Proclus says that the first monad is the eternal God, the second is eternity, the third, the paradigm or pattern of the universe, the three constituting the intelligible triad. Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, I guess. Long before the introduction of idolatry into religion, Is that an introduction? Long before the introduction of idolatry into religion, the early priests caused the statue of a man to be placed in the sanctuary of the temple. This human figure symbolized the divine power in all its intricate manifestations. Thus, the priests of antiquity accepted man as their textbook, and through the study of him, learned to understand the greater and more abstruse mysteries of the celestial scheme of which they were a part. It is not improbable that this mysterious figure standing over the primitive altars was made in the nature of a mannequin, and like certain emblematic hands in the mystery schools, was covered with either carved or painted hieroglyphs. The statue may have opened, thus showing the relative positions of the organs, bones, muscles, nerves, and other parts. After ages of research, the mannequin became a mass of intricate hieroglyphs and symbolic figures. Every part had its secret meaning. The measurements formed a basic standard by means of which it was possible to measure all parts of the cosmos. It was a glorious composite emblem of all the knowledge possessed by the sages and hierophants. This is something also that appears in Buddhism, where there are descriptions of Buddha's traits as a holy man. His traits, there's little things like all his toes are the same length, or his toenails are curved so and so. They described all this. They described what they considered the many perfections of Buddha's body, because if one thinks that the inner is the reflection of the outer, then the perfect world, or the perfect man, is one that perfectly reflects the world and perfectly is attuned to it. So oftentimes when we think about what is aesthetic or what is beautiful to us, an aesthetic thing is often that which is well suited to its place and time. So Buddha was the pinnacle of a place and time. So after this came the age of idolatry. The mysteries decayed from within. The secrets were lost, and none knew the identity of the mysterious man who stood over the altar. It was remembered only that the figure was a sacred and glorious symbol of the universal power, and it finally came to be looked upon as a god, the one in whose image man was made. Having lost the knowledge of the purpose for which the mannequin was originally constructed, the priests worshipped this effigy until at last their lack of spiritual understanding brought the temple down in ruins about their heads, and the statue crumbled with the civilization that had forgotten its meaning. Proceeding from this assumption of the first theologians that man is actually fashioned in the image of God, the initiated minds of past ages erected the stupendous structure of theology upon the foundation of the human body. The religious world of today is almost totally ignorant of the fact that the science of biology is the fountainhead of its doctrines and tenets. Many of the codes and laws believed by modern divines to have been direct revelations from divinity are in reality the fruitage of ages of patient delving into the intricacies of the human constitution and the infinite wonders revealed by such a study. In nearly all the sacred books of the world can be traced an anatomical analogy. This is the most evident in their creation myths. Anyone familiar with embryology and obstetrics will have no difficulty in recognizing the basis of the allegory concerning Adam and Eve and the Garden of Eden, the 9 degrees of the Eleusinian mysteries, and the Brahmanic legend of Vishnu's incarnations. The story of the universal egg, the Scandinavian myth of Ginnungagap, the dark cleft in space in which the seed of the world is sown, and the use of the fish as the emblem of the paternal generative power. Also, that's related to our astrological age today. The paternal generative power is the sun, and the sun's symbolic image in the mystery changes every 2,160 years. So right now it's Pisces, the fish, and that's Jesu Christo Theo Eos Soter, Jesus Christ, Son of God, Savior. But before that, it was the sun was in the house of Aries, and Moses was in charge and oversaw the sacrificing of rams and lambs. And in the next age, it will be the man who carries water, Aquarius, whose form we do not quite know yet. All right, so I'm just checking on the chat right now. Someone was pinging me in Discord, but it really didn't have anything to do with this. In nearly all the sacred books of the world can be traced an anatomical analogy. This is most evident in their creation myths. Anyone familiar with embryology? Yes. The Garden of Eden and the tree. I have a very good image I'm going to put up. Let me see if I can find it, because there's a good image that I've been holding on to for a while, and I would like to credit whoever did it, whoever made it, but I don't know what it is called. So it's worth explaining. So yeah, the tree of life, the placenta. Look, this is a picture of the placenta and the umbilical cord coming out. This is the tree of life. They're very similar. So this is a wonderful image because it brings up some other things. And as the umbilical cord connects an unborn baby to the placenta, so does the silver cord connect our body with our spirit, and thus the divine forces, the true source of life. When the umbilical cord is cut, we are born in this realm. When the silver cord is cut, we die and we are reborn in another realm. Death is hard to explain, but it's almost like walking through a gateway. And I mean, you all went through birth, so you know that was like opening a gateway in a certain sense. It usually is. We'll put it that way, I guess. I've been lucky enough to have recovered some past life memories in meditation and reflection over time, and even memories of my own birth in this life. So they're buried there somewhere, and you can find them. You can find the memories in your mind. because the impressions are there no matter what. There's some sense impressions that were made, and the brain is very plastic in that sense and takes sense impressions and compresses them and keeps them over time, and even passes them on to children through genetic memory, through what they thought was garbage DNA. Right? They said, we don't know what this is. It looks like garbage. It doesn't look like garbage. If you've ever tried to open an image file in a web browser or a text editor, if you ever opened the wrong file in the wrong program, then you'll know that it looks like gibberish. But it's not gibberish. It's just a different format. And that format is memory. There's DNA memory or genetic memory that is passed down to some degree. The proper study of mankind is man. These all show the true origin of theological speculation. The philosophers of antiquity realized that man himself was the key to the riddle of life, for he was the living image of the divine plan, and in future ages humanity also will come to realize more fully the solemn import of those ancient words, the proper study of mankind is man. In that sense, I think that it's very valuable to think that you don't need to seek out here. You have everything you need right here. You always have everything you need at the given time. You just are not aware of it, or are aware of it to greater or lesser degrees. There are both God and man have a twofold constitution, of which the superior part is invisible and the inferior part visible. In both, there is also an intermediary sphere, marking the point where these visible and invisible natures meet. As the spiritual nature of God controls his objective universal form, which is actually a crystallized idea, so the spiritual nature of man is the invisible cause and controlling power of his visible material personality. Thus it is evident that the spirit of man bears the same relationship of his material body that God bears to the objective universe. The mysteries taught that spirit or life was anterior to form, and that what is anterior includes all that is posterior to itself. Spirit being anterior to form is therefore included within the realm of the spirit. It is also a popular statement or belief that man's spirit is within his body. According to the conclusions of philosophy and theology, however, this belief is erroneous, for spirit first circumscribes an area and then manifests within it. Philosophically speaking, form, being a part of spirit, is within spirit. But spirit is more than the sum of form. As the material nature of man is therefore within the sum of spirit, so the universal nature, including the entire sidereal system, is within the all-pervading essence of God, the universal spirit. According to another concept of the ancient wisdom, all bodies, whether spiritual or material, have three centers, called by the Greeks the upper center, the middle center, and the lower center. An apparent ambiguity will here be noted. To diagram or symbolize adequately abstract mental verities is impossible, for the diagrammatic representation of one aspect of metaphysical relationships may be an actual contradiction of some other aspect. While that which is above is generally considered superior in dignity and power, in reality that which is in the center is superior and anterior to both that which is said to be above and that which is said to be below. Therefore, it must be said that the first, which is considered as being above, is actually in the center, while both of the others, which are said to be either above or below, are actually beneath. This point can be further simplified if the reader will consider above as indicating degree of proximity to source and below as indicating degree of distance from source. Source being posited in the actual center and relative distance being the various points along the radii from the center toward the circumference. In matters pertaining to philosophy and theology, up may be considered as toward the center and down as toward the circumference. Center is spirit, circumference is matter. Therefore, up is toward spirit along an ascending scale of spirituality. Down is toward matter along an ascending scale of materiality. The latter concept is partly expressed by the apex of a cone, which, when viewed from above, is seen as a point in the exact center of the circumference formed by the base of the cone. What this is saying, you have to keep in mind, I believe this was written in 1929. So this had not actually, I'm pretty sure this had not been scientifically discovered yet, because I've just been reading about it recently in medical journals. And that is that there are neural tissues or nerve tissues within the heart and within the gut. And so the human body is said to, it doesn't actually have one nervous system center, it has three. And this is precisely what he's talking about here, which is that the head and the gut are balanced by the heart. And that is why, for example, in ancient Egypt, it was said that when you died, you would go and meet Maat, the goddess of truth, and she would weigh your heart against a feather. And if your heart was heavier than a feather, then you would be devoured by the serpent Typhon. But if your heart was lighter than a feather, then you could continue into the blessed world of the afterlife. This whole thing is an allegory about the importance of the heart center, the heart brain, you could say. There's you have a head brain, a heart brain, and a gut brain, and everyone has all three. And that's one of those things, like, you should be very careful about how you diet, because it affects all three brains, but especially your gut biome is for most people today poisonous. I mean, most people's gut biome is in a bad state of affairs these days, because the things that we eat are not close enough to the source. But I don't want to get too distracted from this. This is the Tetragrammaton in the human heart. This is one of, actually, I love this image. So let's see. Oh, Christus. It says Christus around, and then there's a heart, and then let's see. Yod He Wa He. This is something that I like to bring up to people. Yod. This is breathing. This is the sound of breathing. Yod. Look at the letters. So the letter Yod is like a short Wa. This is Wa. This is Yod. And Wa is like a full inhale, and Yod is like a short inhale. So this is, Yod indicates the beginning of breathing, a sudden sun arriving. And the shape of the letters indicates the shape of the throat. So when you have that sharp intake of breath, it's through the nose. This is intake of breath through the nose. It's one passage down, and then the open throat of hey is the out breath. It's the name Yahweh is directly related to the human body. I don't know whether it's better to do black on white or white on black. If any of you have an opinion on that, just leave me a comment, because sometimes I do it because it hurts my eyes to stare at white for too long. It's just very bright. Okay, so this is from Burma. Is Libri Apologetici. The Tetragrammaton, or four-lettered name of God, is here arranged as a tetractys within the inverted human heart. Beneath the name Yehovah is shown transformed into Yehoshua by the interpolation of the radiant Hebrew letter Shin. That's not the letter Shin. This is just a misprint on it. This is Mem Hey. That's not the letter Shin. The letter Shin is this three prongs. It's like three prongs. It's interesting, actually. Shin is one of the three mothers, and it represents the generative aspect. So the drawing is when Jehovah is transformed into Jehoshua, and that means Yeshua. Yahweh is transformed into Yeshua by the insertion of Shin, and that means Shin is the masculine penetrating force. That's why it's represented like this. So the drawing as a whole represents the throne of God and his hierarchies within the heart of man. In the first book of his Libri Apologetici, Jacob Borma thus describes the meaning of the symbol. For we men have one book in common which points to God. Each has it within himself, which is the priceless name of God. Its letters are the flames of his love, which he out of his heart in the priceless name of Jesus has revealed to us. Read these letters in your heart and spirits, and you have books enough. All the writings of the children of God direct you unto that one book, for therein lie all the treasures of wisdom. This book is Christ in you. That's true. In the Torah, if you go and you take the Torah, the very first letter of the Torah is Bet, in Bereshith, in the beginning. And the last letter of the Torah is Lamed, of Israel, and that spells Lev, which means heart. So the entirety of the Torah, once you've gone from front to back, then you're at Lamed. You go back to the front, and you discover that the whole Torah is within your heart. The Torah is the scaffolding or the blueprint on which the world is created, and it is that thing that we were talking about earlier that is self-reflective at all levels. it is that element that makes reality what it is. It is the law. And that means the laws of physics, the laws of nature, the laws of thermodynamics, the laws that we're familiar with and we've come to know and love in our universe here. There are other universes that may have different laws. Well, let's say there could be other universes that have different laws. I don't personally know about universes that have other laws than these, but I can posit that they exist, and because I can posit that they exist, I assume that in an infinite space they must exist. But the important aspect to take is that the book itself is only a cross section of a cross section of a cross section of the truth. The true Torah is a metaphysical object, not a physical object. It's a metaphysical object. Meta meaning beyond. It's the beyond physical object. So, returning to our talk about the three universal centers of the head and the heart and the gut. These three universal centers, the one above, the one below, and the link uniting them, represent three suns or three aspects of one sun, centers of effulgence. These also have their analogies in the three grand centers of the human body, which, like the physical universe, is a demiurgic fabrication. The first of these suns, says Thomas Taylor, is analogous to light when viewed subsisting in its fountain, the sun. The second to the light immediately proceeding from the sun, and the third to the splendor communicated to other natures by this light. Since the superior or spiritual center is in the midst of the other two, its analog in the physical body is the heart, the most spiritual and mysterious organ in the human body. The second center, or the link between the superior and inferior worlds, is elevated to the position of greatest physical dignity, the brain. The third, or lower center, is relegated to the position of least physical dignity but greatest physical importance, the generative system and the digestive system. Thus, the heart is symbolically the source of life. The brain, the link by which, through rational intelligence, life and form are united, and the generative system, or infernal creator, the source of that power by which the physical organisms are produced. Like a furnace. Your gut is like a furnace, is a ancient Tibetan thing. They would practice tumo breathing, which is stoking the furnace. Tumo, sometimes translated as like fire breathing, but it means like stoking the furnace. So it's a style of breathing that monks use in the Himalayan mountains. You can see them sitting out in the snow, and there will be steam rising off of them because their bodies are so warmed by internal heat through their breathing techniques. The Wim Hof Method is also related to this, and if you haven't checked out the Wim Hof method of breathing, it's basically a modern manifestation of the wisdom that's found in the Kundalini Yoga Upanishad from India, but it has many adherents now and has many guided breathing things that are good. I would say look into it. So the ideals and aspirations of the individual depend largely upon which of these three centers of power predominates in scope and activity of expression. In the materialist, the lower center is the strongest. In the intellectualist, the higher center. But in the initiate, the middle center. By bathing the two extremes in a flood of spiritual effulgence, controls wholesomely both the mind and body. As light bears witness of life, which is its source, so the mind bears witness of the spirit, and activity in a still lower plane bears witness of intelligence. Thus the mind bears witness of the heart, while the generative system in turn bears witness of the mind. Accordingly, the spiritual nature is most commonly symbolized by a heart, the intellectual power by an opened eye, symbolizing the pineal gland or cyclopean eye, or the third eye or ajna eye, which is the two-faced Janus of the pagan mysteries. And the generative system by a flower, a staff, a cup, or a hand. Usually it's a staff. Like in tarot, it's the suit of staves or the suit of wands is the suit of the fire, the generative fire. And the fire element is the generative element. So when you look at a Merkabah, there's another good image I could bring up here, but maybe I'll save it for another time. It's simple enough to describe. The Merkabah, the water comes from on high and flows down, falling like rain. This mind is more like water, and the fire starts low and rises up. And those two forces meeting, they're represented by two triangles. And together they make the Merkabah, or the shield of Solomon, or the Star of David. Long a symbol of the mysteries, only recently adopted by mainstream Judaism, but it is a Abrahamic symbol, I suppose. It is. I mean, it's all coming from the same place. Moses was learned in the schools of the Egyptians. Abraham was learned in the schools of the Babylonians. It was. They were all initiates of exactly what we're talking about here. While all the mysteries recognize the heart as the center of spiritual consciousness, they often purposely ignored this concept and used the heart in its exoteric sense as the symbol of the emotional nature. In this arrangement, the generative center represented the physical body, the heart the emotional body, and the brain the mental body. The brain represented the superior sphere, but after the initiates had passed through the lower degrees, they were instructed that the brain was the proxy of the spiritual flame dwelling in the innermost recesses of the heart. The student of esotericism discovers ere long that the ancients often resorted to various blinds to conceal the true interpretations of their mysteries. The substitution of the brain for the heart was one of these blinds. This is something that I actually feel very strongly about, because it's where the world puts its energy. If we all put our energy into our gut, then we would be hunter-gatherers still. If we all put our energy into our mind, then we get technology like we have today. But at any time, you can find balance in the heart. The 3 degrees of the ancient mysteries were, with few exceptions, given in chambers which represented the 3 great centers of the human and universal bodies. If possible, the temple itself was constructed in the form of the human body. The candidate entered between the feet and received the highest degree in the point corresponding to the brain. Thus, the first degree was the material mystery, and its symbol was the generative system. It raised the candidate through the various degrees of concrete thought. The second degree was given in the chamber corresponding to the heart, but represented the middle power, which was the mental link. Here the candidate was initiated into the mysteries of abstract thought and lifted as high as the mind was capable of penetrating. He then passed into the third chamber, which, analogous to the brain, occupied the highest position in the temple, but analogous to the heart, was of the greatest dignity. In the brain chamber, the heart mystery was given. Here the initiate for the first time truly comprehended the meaning of those immortal words, "As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he." As there are 7 hearts in the brain, so there are 7 brains in the heart. But this is a matter of superphysics, of which little can be said at the present time. That's so interesting. Proclus writes on this subject in the first book of On the Theology of Plato. Indeed, Socrates, in the first Alcibiades, rightly observes that the soul entering into herself will behold all other things, and deity itself. For verging to her own union, and to the center of all life, laying aside multitude and the variety of all manifold powers which she contains, she ascends to the highest watchtower offerings, and as in the most holy of mysteries, they say that the mystics at first meet with the multiform and many-shaped genera, which are hurled forth before the gods, but on entering the temple, unmoved and guarded by the mystic rites, they genuinely receive in their bosom heart divine illumination, and divested of their garments, as they would say, participate of a divine nature. The same mode, as it appears to me, takes place in the speculation of wholes. For the soul, when looking at things posterior to herself, beholds the shadows and images of beings, but when she converts herself to herself, she evolves her own essence, and the reasons which she contains, and at first, indeed, she only, as it were, beholds herself. But when she penetrates more profoundly into the knowledge of herself, she finds in herself both intellect and the order of beings. When, however, she proceeds into her interior recesses and into the adytum, as it were, of the soul, she perceives with her eye closed, without the aid of the lower mind, the genus of the gods, and the unities of beings. For all things are in us psychically, and through this we are naturally capable of knowing all things, by exciting the powers and the images of the wholes which we contain. The initiates of old warned their disciples that an image is not reality, but merely the objectification of a subjective idea. The image of the gods were not designed to be objects of worship, but were to be regarded merely as emblems or reminders of invisible powers and principles. Similarly, the body of man must not be considered as the individual, but only as the house of the individual. In the same manner that the temple was the house of God, in a state of grossness and perversion, man's body is the tomb or prison of a divine principle. In a state of grossness and perversion, man's body is the tomb or prison of a divine principle. In a state of unfoldment and regeneration, it is a house or sanctuary of the deity, by whose creative powers it was fashioned. Personality is suspended upon a thread from the nature of being, declares the secret work. Man is essentially a permanent and immortal principle. Only his bodies pass through the cycle of birth and death. The immortal is the reality. The mortal is the unreality. During each period of earth life, reality thus dwells in unreality, to be liberated from it temporarily by death and permanently by illumination. Here is a hand decorated with effigies of Jesus Christ, the Virgin Mary, and the 12 apostles. Let's see. Upon the 12 phalanges of the fingers appear the likenesses of the apostles. Let's take a look. Okay. Actually, this is is how they had is how they did the base 12 or base 60 counting system in ancient Babylon, which was to count the joints. Because 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And you could just move your thumb across them and it would represent a different number. That was the way that the Babylonians counted. So they naturally counted to 12 instead of counting to 10 by counting fingers. That's why we call it digital, because these are digits. Fingers are digits. But I don't know what the word would be. It would be something having to do with joints. The number 12 is incredibly significant in these matters. Upon the 12 phalanges of the fingers appear the likeness of the apostles, each bearing its own appropriate symbol. In the case of those who suffered martyrdom, the symbol signifies the instrument of death. Oh, okay. Well, that sucks. Thus, the symbol of St. Andrew is a cross, of St. Thomas a javelin or a builder's square, of St. James the Lesser a club, of St. Philip a cross, of St. Bartholomew a large knife or scimitar, of St. Matthew a sword or spear, sometimes a purse. Of St. Simon a club or saw, of St. Matthias an axe, and of St. Judas a halberd. But Judas hung himself. Why would you? The apostles whose symbols do not relate to their martyrdom are St. Peter, who carries 2 crossed keys, 1 gold and 1 silver. That represents the papacy. The papacy's symbol in heraldry is 2 crossed keys. Guess that's their way of telling you that they have the keys to all the secrets, and you don't get to know. You don't get any. St. James the Great, who bears a pilgrim's staff and a scallop shell, and St. John, who holds a cup from which the poison miraculously departed in the form of a serpent. See Handbook of Christian Symbolism. The figure of Christ upon the second phalange of the thumb does not follow the pagan system of assigning the first person of the creative triad to this position. God the Father should occupy the second phalange, God the Son the first phalange, while to God the Holy Spirit is assigned the base of the thumb. Also, according to the philosophic arrangement, the Virgin should occupy the base of the thumb, which is sacred to the moon. Everything in life has an interrelation. There was a Renaissance scholar by the name of Ramon Lull, and his doctrine of Lullism was a doctrine of memorizing things by understanding their interrelations to each other and categorizing them according to a system that is occult in this, like this. His system of memory was, I believe, he wrote De Memoriam, on memory. He was influential on Giordano Bruno, who was an influential astronomer and hermeticist, who was burnt at the stake for his hermetic teachings, for openly preaching them and not ceasing when the church asked him to cease. While generally regarded as polytheists, The pagans gained this reputation not because they worshipped more than one god, but rather because they personified the attributes of this god, thereby creating a pantheon of posterior deities which manifesting a part of what the one god manifested as a whole. The various pantheons of ancient religions therefore actually represent the cataloged and personified attributes of deity. In this respect, they correspond to the hierarchies of the Hebrew Kabbalists. All the gods and goddesses of antiquity consequently have their analogies in the human body, as have also the elements, planets, and constellations, which were assigned as proper vehicles for these celestials. 4 body centers are assigned to the elements, the 7 vital organs to the planets, the 12 principal parts and members to the zodiac, the invisible parts of man's divine nature to various supermundane deities, while the hidden god was declared to manifest through the marrow in the bones. That's also how the Chinese say that one has qi energy, but when one concentrates qi energy into a concentrated form, it enters into the marrow of the bones as jing. And jing energy is the energy that you could normal force requires a backward movement, but jing force is the movement. It's like the 1-inch punch. It's the direct forward pressure. That's one of those things in Eastern philosophy. It is difficult for many to realize that they are actual universes. That's a weighty sentence. I will repeat it. It is difficult for many to realize that they are actual universes, that their physical bodies are a visible nature through the structure of which countless waves of evolving life are unfolding their latent potentialities. Yet through man's physical body, not only are a mineral, a plant, and an animal kingdom evolving, but also unknown classifications and divisions of invisible spiritual life. Just as cells are infinitesimal units in the structure of man, so man is an infinitesimal unit in the structure of the universe. A theology based upon the knowledge and appreciation of these relationships is as profoundly just as it is profoundly true. It is as profoundly just as it is profoundly true. As man's physical body has 5 distinct and important extremities, that is 2 legs, 2 arms, and a head, of which the last governs the first 4, the number 5 has been accepted as the symbol of man. By its 4 corners, the pyramid symbolizes the arms and legs. By its apex, the head, thus indicating that one rational power controls 4 irrational corners. The hands and feet are used to represent the 4 elements, of which the 2 feet are earth and water, and the 2 hands fire and air. The brain then symbolizes the sacred 5th element, ether, which controls and unites the other 4. If the feet are placed together and the arms outspread, man then symbolizes the cross with the rational intellect as the head or upper limb. The fingers and toes also have special significance. The toes represent the 10 commandments of the physical law, and the fingers the 10 commandments of the spiritual law. The 4 fingers of each hand represent the 4 elements, and the 3 phalanges of each finger represents the divisions of the elements, so that each hand there are 12 parts to the fingers, which are analogous to the signs of the zodiac, whereas the 2 phalanges and base of each thumb signify the threefold deity. The first phalange corresponds to the creative aspect, the second to the preservative aspect, and the base to the generative and destructive aspect. When the hands are brought together, the result is the 24 elders and the 6 days of creation. There's a very interesting thing in this. The way that it's projecting these patterns onto the body, it manifests in such beautiful ways. But the cardinal... So think about this. If you're familiar with the tarot, my deck is not close by, so I can't pull it out for you. But the royal court is indicative of the zodiac. The page is the initiate, so he's not a member of the royal court yet. He's the apprentice to be initiated. But the knight, the queen, and the king represent the cardinal, the fixed and mutable zodiac signs for each element. So you have 4 elements, and then each one of them you have a cardinal. You have a cardinal element. You have a fixed element. It doesn't really do anything, but the mutable element is the tip. It's a wonderful system. And all of this is inscribed in your body. As above, so below. In symbolism, the body is divided vertically into halves, the right half being considered as light and the left half as darkness. By those unacquainted with the true meanings of light and darkness, the light half was denominated spiritual and the left half material. Light is the symbol of objectivity, darkness of subjectivity. Light is a manifestation of life and is therefore posterior to life. That which is anterior to light is darkness, in which light exists temporarily, but darkness permanently. As life precedes light, its only symbol is darkness, and darkness is considered as the veil which must eternally conceal the true nature of abstract and undifferentiated being. In ancient times, men fought with their right arms and defended the vital centers with their left arms, on which was carried the protecting shield. The right half of the body was regarded therefore as offensive, and the left was defensive. For this reason also, the right side of the body was considered masculine and the left side feminine. Several authorities are of the opinion that the present prevalent right-handedness of the race is the outgrowth of the custom of holding the left hand in restraint for defensive purposes. Furthermore, as the source of being is in the primal darkness which preceded light, so the spiritual nature of man is in the dark part of his being, for the heart is on the left side. That would be this. The spiritual nature is concealed. I have a favorite biblical passage. It's in Psalms. This is saying of God, He made darkness His secret place. His pavilion round about Him were dark waters and thick clouds of the skies. I like Young's literal translation. He maketh darkness His secret place. Round about Him His tabernacle. A tabernacle being a temple, a setup for, like the tent that you would set up for a movable temple. darkness of waters, thick clouds of the skies. It is said that God hides in darkness. The spiritual nature of man is also in darkness, meaning it is concealed. Darkness isn't bad. There's nothing bad about it. It's necessary. It's the basic nature. And then light is the additional nature. Okay, so among the curious misconceptions arising from the false practice of associating darkness with evil is one by which several early nations used the right hand for all constructive labors and the left hand for only those purposes termed unclean and unfit for the sight of the gods. For the same reason, black magic was often referred to as the left-hand path, and heaven was said to be upon the right and hell upon the left. Some philosophers further declared that there were two methods of writing, one from left to right, which was considered the exoteric method, and the other from right to left, which was considered esoteric. The exoteric writing was that which was done out or away from the heart, while the esoteric writing was that which, like the ancient Hebrew, was written towards the heart. The secret doctrine declares that every part and member of the body is epitomized in the brain, and in turn, that all that is in the brain is epitomized in the heart. In symbolism, the human head is frequently used to represent intelligence and self-knowledge, as the human body in its entirety is the most perfect known product of the Earth's evolution. It was employed to represent divinity, the highest appreciable state or condition. Artists attempting to portray divinity often show only a hand emerging from an impenetrable cloud. The cloud signifies the unknowable divinity concealed from man by human limitation. The hand signifies the divine activity, the only part of God which is cognizable to the lower senses. The face consists of a natural trinity, the eyes representing the spiritual power which comprehends, the nostrils representing the preservative and vivifying power, and the mouth and ears representing the material demiurgic power of the lower world. The first sphere is eternally existent and is creative. The second sphere pertains to the mystery of the creative breach, and the third sphere to the creative word. By the word of God, the material universe was fabricated, and the seven creative powers, or vowel sounds, which has been brought into existence by the speaking of the word, became the seven Elohim, or deities, by whose power and ministration the lower world was organized. Occasionally, the deity is symbolized by an eye, an ear, a nose, or a mouth. By the first, divine awareness is signified. By the second, divine interest. By the third, divine vitality. And by the fourth, divine command. The ancients did not believe that spirituality made men either righteous or rational, but rather that righteousness and rationality made men spiritual. The mysteries taught that spiritual illumination was attained only by bringing their lower nature up to a certain standard of efficiency and purity. The mysteries were therefore established for the purpose of unfolding the nature of man according to certain fixed rules, which, when faithfully followed, elevated the human consciousness to a point where it was capable of cognizing its own constitution and the true purpose of existence. This knowledge of how man's manifold constitution could be most quickly and most completely regenerated to the point of spiritual illumination constituted the secret or esoteric doctrine of antiquity. Certain apparently physical organs and centers are in reality the veils or sheaths of spiritual centers. What these were and how they could be unfolded was never revealed to the unregenerate. For the philosophers realized that once he understands the complete working of any system, a man may accomplish a prescribed end without being qualified to manipulate and control the effects which he has produced. For this reason, long periods of probation were imposed, so that the knowledge of how to become as the gods might remain the sole possession of the worthy. Become as the gods might remain the sole possession of the worthy. Well, it's birthright to everyone. Everyone becomes worthy at some time, eventually. It's just a matter of time. It's just how long it takes you to get there. Everyone's on the path. There's only... You can walk forward, you could walk backward, but you're eventually going to reach the end, given an infinite length of time. Well, I guess if it's an infinite length of time, there would not be an end of the path. It would just continue forever. So, lest that knowledge be lost, however, it was concealed in allegories and myths, which were meaningless to the profane, but self-evident to those acquainted with that theory of personal redemption, which was the foundation of philosophical theology. Christianity itself may be cited as an example. The entire New Testament is in fact an ingeniously concealed exposition of the secret processes of human regeneration. The characters so long considered as historical men and women are really the personification of certain processes which take place in the human body when man begins the task of consciously liberating himself from the bondage of ignorance and death. The garments and ornamentations supposedly worn by the gods are also keys, for in the mysteries, clothing was considered as synonymous with form. The degree of spirituality or materiality of the organisms was signified by the quality, beauty, and value of the garments worn. Man's physical body was looked upon as the robe of his spiritual nature. Consequently, the more developed were his supersubstantial powers, the more glorious his apparel. Of course, clothing was originally worn for ornamentation rather than protection, and such practice still prevails among many primitive peoples. The mysteries caught that man's only lasting adornments, were his virtues and worthy characteristics, that he was clothed in his own accomplishments and adorned by his attainments. Thus the white robe was symbolic of purity, the red robe of sacrifice and love, and the blue robe of altruism and integrity. Since the body was said to be the robe of the spirit, mental or moral deformities were depicted as deformities of the body. Considering man's body as the measuring rule of the universe, the philosophers declared that all things resemble in constitution, if not in form, the human body. The Greeks, for example, declared Delphi to be the navel of the earth, for the physical planet was looked upon as a gigantic human being twisted into the form of a ball. In contradistinction to the belief of Christendom that the earth is an inanimate thing, the pagans considered not only the earth, but also all the sidereal bodies as individual creatures possessing individual intelligences. They even went so far as to view the various kingdoms of nature as individual entities. The animal kingdom, for example, was looked upon as one being, a composite of all the creatures composing that kingdom. This prototypic beast was a mosaic embodiment of all animal propensities, and within its nature, the entire animal world existed as the human species exists within the constitution of the prototypic atom. In the same manner, races, nations, tribes, religions, states, communities, and cities were viewed as composite entities, each made up of varying numbers of individual units. Every community has an individuality, which is the sum of the individual attitude of its inhabitants. Every religion is an individual whose body is made up of a hierarchy and vast host of individual worshippers. The organization of any religion represents its physical body and its individual members, the cell life making up the organism. Accordingly, religions, races, and communities, like individuals, pass through Shakespeare's 7 ages, for the life of man is a standard by which the perpetuity of all things is estimated. This is something that the Apostle Paul said. It's in 1 Corinthians, members in the body of Christ. Let's see. Yeah, this will be it. For just as the body is one and has many members, and all the members of the body, though many, are one, so it is with Christ. For in one Spirit we were all baptized into one body, Jews or Greeks, slaves or free, and all were made to drink of one Spirit. For the body does not consist of one member, but of many. If the foot should say, because I am not a hand, I do not belong to the body, that would not make it any less a part of the body. And if the ear should say, because I am not an eye, I do not belong to the body, that would not make it any less a part of the body. If the whole body were an eye, where would be the sense of hearing? If the whole body were an ear, where would be the sense of smell? But as it is, God arranged the members in the body, each one of them, as he chose. If all were a single member, where would the body be? As it is, there are many parts, yet one body. The eye cannot say to the hand, I have no need of you, nor again the head to the feet, I have no need of you. On the contrary, the parts of the body that seem to be weaker are indispensable, and on those parts of the body that we think less honorable we bestow the greater honor, and our unpresentable parts are treated with greater modesty, which our more presentable parts do not require. But God has so composed the body, giving greater honor to the part that lacked it, that there may be no division in the body, but that the members may have the same care for one another. If one member suffers, all suffer together. If one member is honored, all rejoice together. Now you are the body of Christ and individually members of it. That is what we were talking about the sacrament and the Dionysian mystery, where the body of Christ is the literal body of the congregation. As they eat of the bread together, they're binding themselves together into one body by a ritual act. So, according to the secret doctrine, man, through the gradual refinement of his vehicle and the ever-increasing sensitiveness resulting from that refinement, is gradually overcoming the limitations of matter and is disentangling himself from his mortal coil. When humanity has completed its physical evolution, the empty shell of materiality left behind will be used by other life waves as stepping stones to their own liberation. The trend of man's evolutionary growth is ever toward his own essential selfhood. At the point of deepest materialism, therefore, man is at the greatest distance from himself. According to the mystery teachings, not all the spiritual nature of man incarnates in matter. The spirit of man is diagrammatically shown as an equilateral triangle with one point downward. This lower point, which is 1/3 of the spiritual nature, but in comparison to the dignity of the other two, is much less than 1/3, descends into the illusion of material existence for a brief space of time. That which never clothes itself in the sheath of matter is the hermetic anthropos, the overman, analogous to the Cyclops or guardian demon of the Greeks, an angel of Jacob Boehme, and the oversoul of Emerson. That unity, that oversoul, within which every man's particular being is contained and made one with all others. At birth, only a third part of the divine nature of man temporarily dissociates itself from its own immortality and takes upon itself the dream of physical birth and existence, animating with its own celestial enthusiasm a vehicle composed of material elements, part of and bound to the material sphere. At death, this incarnated part awakens from the dream of physical existence and reunites itself once more with its eternal condition. This periodical descent of spirit into matter is termed the wheel of life and death, and the principles involved are treated at length by the philosophers under the subject of metempsychosis. By initiation into the mysteries and a certain process known as operative theology, this law of birth and death is transcended, and during the course of physical existence, that part of the spirit which is asleep in form is awakened without the intervention of death, the inevitable initiator, and is consciously reunited with the anthropos, or the overshadowing substance of itself. This is at once the primary purpose and the consummate achievement of the mysteries, that man shall become aware of and consciously be reunited with the divine source of himself without tasting of physical dissolution. The Divine Tree in Man, from Law's Figures of Jakob Burma. Just as the diagram representing the front view of man illustrates his divine principles in their regenerated state, so the back view of the same figure sets forth the inferior or night condition of the sun. From the sphere of the astral mind, a line ascends through the sphere of reason into that of the senses. The sphere of the astral mind and of the senses are filled with stars to signify the nocturnal condition of their natures. In the sphere of reason, the superior and the inferior are reconciled. Reason in the mortal man corresponding to illumined understanding in the spiritual man. So, almost every culture has a tradition of the spinal energy, and they value the number 32 very highly, and that's because there's 31 nerve pathways that branch off of the spine, and one complex of nerves that goes through the cranium, total of 32, and the total how many nerves go through the brain? 12. In the cranial complex, there are 12 major nerves. The Divine Tree in Man. A tree with its roots in the heart rises from the mirror of the deity through the sphere of the understanding to branch forth in the sphere of the senses. The roots and trunk of this tree represent the divine nature of man and may be called his spirituality. The branches of the tree are separate parts of the divine constitution and may be likened to the individuality, and the leaves, because of their ephemeral nature, correspond to the personality, which partakes of none of the permanence of its divine source. Our next lecture will be on the Hieramic legend, which is the which is the central legend of Freemasonry. It's a very fascinating subject, and I hope you all will join me for that. As for now, I will leave us with a prayer. Have a wonderful rest of